The past is never truly gone. It's a shadow lingering at the edges of your vision, a murmur just beneath the clamor of daily life. For 15 years, Jamal had built a fortress of routine and silence to keep that shadow at bay. He lived a quiet life, with a steady job and the kind of peace that comes from deliberately burying your emotions where no one, not even you, can find them. But one Tuesday afternoon, the shadow roared back. It arrived not in a dream or a fleeting memory, but in a 7-second voicemail that shattered his carefully constructed world, proving some graves refused to stay sealed. The autumn light, pale as weak tea, streamed through the large plate glass window of Jamal's workshop, illuminating the graceful swirl of sawdust in the air. For Jamal, this was sanctuary, the scent of freshly cut mahogany, the steady scrape of a hand plane gliding over wood, the patient transformation of a raw slab into something with purpose and beauty. This was his language, the only one he still spoke fluently. At 47, his life was a study in intentional simplicity. He was a luthier, a craftsman of exquisite classical guitars, a trade demanding monastic discipline and a deep understanding of tension and release. It was a fitting metaphor for the man he'd become. His hands, calloused and etched with the intricate lines of his craft, moved with a precision bordering on reverence. He was shaping the neck of a new instrument, the curve of the heel fitting into his palm like a living thing. The outside world, with its chaotic symphonies of traffic and ambition, faded away here. There was only the wood, the tools, and the soft hum of the dehumidifier in the corner, a sound as constant and comforting as his own heartbeat. His workshop was attached to a small, meticulously kept house on the outskirts of a sleepy Vermont town, a life he had chosen, or rather, built board by board, through years of solitude. The vibration on his workbench was an unwelcome intrusion. He frowned, his focus broken. His phone, a basic flip model he stubbornly clung to, buzzed insistently. He rarely got calls. Clients communicated via email, respecting the sanctity of his creative space. His sister, his only family, knew not to call during work hours. He let it go to voicemail, as he did with most of the world's demands. He picked up a sheet of fine grit, sandpaper, ready to resume his communion with the wood. But the phone buzzed again, a notification. A voicemail had been left. He sighed, a breath stirring the dust motes. Wiping his hands on his leather apron, he flipped open the phone. The screen glowed with an unfamiliar number. He pressed play, holding the small device to his ear, already annoyed at the interruption. Then he heard her voice. Jamal, it's Aisha. I know it's been a long time, a whole lifetime, but I need to see you. We have to talk. The message lasted only 7 seconds. 7 seconds that dismantled 15 years of carefully built peace. The phone slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the workbench with a sharp plastic sound that echoed deafeningly. In the sudden roaring silence, Aisha, her voice was different yet hauntingly, terrifyingly the same. The slight tremor he remembered from her nervous moments. The faint musical lilt that had once been the soundtrack to his entire existence. It was thinner now, etched with a weariness that hadn't been there before, but it was unmistakably hers. The shadow had found a voice. He stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. His heart, long dormant, pounded against his ribs like a trapped bird. He backed away from the bench, his legs unsteady, and sank into the worn armchair in the corner. The scent of mahogany suddenly clawed, suffocating. The tranquil workshop felt like a cage. 15 years they had agreed to it, a clean break. After the fire, after the shouting turned to weeping, and the weeping to a desolate silence, there, lawyers handled everything. No contact, no emails, no calls, no chance encounters. They sold the city house, split the assets, and cleaved their lives in two with the brutal finality of an executioner's axe. He had moved to the quiet solitude of the mountains to forget. He had buried her, buried them, under layers of shavings and routine. He had told himself he'd succeeded. But you can't bury a living thing. We have to talk. Asterisk the words echoed in his mind, stripping away the years. He was no longer Jamal the luthier, master of his silent domain. He was Jamal, Aisha's husband, the man who held her hand in a sterile hospital room, who whispered promises into her hair, who watched the light in her eyes dim until it was nearly gone. The man who had failed her. His gaze drifted to a locked wooden chest in the far corner of the workshop, a beautiful but somber piece he'd made from ebony. He never opened it. No need. Its contents were etched in his memory. A handful of faded photographs, a dried wildflower she tucked into his pocket on their first anniversary, a single tiny crocheted blue bootie. Relics of a life burned to the ground. Why now? After all this time, after the silence had become a scar so old it was part of him, why now? What could possibly be left to say? His mind, a frantic archivist, searched for answers, pulling out dusty, painful memories. Had she remarried? Was she ill? In trouble? A dozen scenarios, each more unsettling than the last, played out in his imagination, the worst being the simplest, that she merely wanted to stir the ashes for lingering embers. He wasn't sure he could survive that. The light outside faded, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. The half-finished guitar on his bench looked like a stranger, a piece of wood with no story. His hands trembled. He wrapped them around his arms, trying to hold himself together, but the carefully constructed man was cracking. The old Jamal, the one who could feel everything, threatened to break through. He looked at the phone again, lying inert on the bench. He could delete the message, he could block the number. He could pretend it never happened, he could reinforce his fortress's walls and return to his quiet, predictable, half-lived life. It would be the safe thing, the sane thing. But he knew he wouldn't, because in those 7 seconds, in that spectral voice, he had heard more than a request. He had heard desperation, and a small, treacherous part of him, the part he thought long excised, felt its echo in his own soul. The shadow had spoken, and now he had to know why. Sleep didn't come. How could it? Jamal lay in his bed, the familiar weight of his quilt a useless comfort against an inner chill. The silence of his house, usually a soothing balm, was now a hollow vessel filled with echoes of Aisha's voice. Asterisk, we have to talk. Asterisk, the words replayed relentlessly, tormentingly. Each repetition peeled back another layer of time, exposing the raw, nerve-rich tissue of memory he had worked so hard to encase. In scar, he turned onto his side, facing the empty space beside him. For years, it had been just that empty space, but tonight it held a phantom presence. He could almost feel the warmth of her body, smell the faint lavender and rain scent that always clung to her hair. He closed his eyes and saw her face, not as a stranger he might pass on the street, but Aisha as she was then, her smile a radiant, lopsided thing that could light up a room, the way she bit her lower lip when focused on her painting, her brow furrowed in a way he found endlessly endearing, the fierce intelligence in her dark eyes, an intensity that had both captivated and intimidated him from the day they met. Their beginning was a whirlwind, a collision of two souls unknowingly waiting for each other. He was a young apprentice, dust-laden and full of dreams. She an artist, her canvases bursting with color and raw emotion. They met at a gallery opening, a world he felt utterly alien in. Yet she saw him, truly saw him. She walked right up to him, a smudge of ultramarine on her cheek, and asked his opinion on a chaotic abstract piece. It feels loud, he'd said, feeling foolish. She threw her head back and laughed, a sound like wind chimes. That's the point, she replied. It's a scream. He was lost from that moment on. Their love was like her paintings, vibrant, passionate, sometimes terrifyingly chaotic. They argued about politics, art, the right way to load a dishwasher, but their reconciliations were just as fierce, melting away anger until only a deep, uncheckable connection remained. He built her an easel, and she'd sometimes sit in his workshop, the smell of turpentine mingling with sandalwood, each lost in their respective crafts, content in shared silence. They bought a small row house in the city, and he spent months renovating it, pouring all his love and skill into the floors, the trim, the built-in shelves she immediately filled to overflowing. It was their canvas, and they were painting a life on it. A floorboard creaked downstairs. Jamal's eyes snapped open. The mundane sound sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through him. He sat up, heart pounding, just the house settling. He knew it was an old house. It made noises, but tonight every sound was a premonition. He swung his legs out of bed. The cold wooden floor a shock to his system. He needed to move, to do something. Pacing his small bedroom offered no relief. He walked downstairs, bare feet silent on the steps he'd built himself. Moonlight flooded the living room, silvering the furniture and rows of books. Everything was neat, orderly, lifeless, a museum of a man who used to be. He ran a hand over his face, stubble rasping against his palm. Who was that man, the one who laughed so easily, who believed in forever? He felt like a stranger in his own skin. He found himself in the kitchen, the sterile gleam of stainless steel mocking him. He opened the fridge, stared blankly at its contents, and closed it again. He was being haunted, and the ghost wasn't just Aisha, it was the man he'd been with. Her. The good memories were the cruelest. Their wedding day, a simple affair in a public garden where she wore bright red boots under her white dress. The day they brought home a stray dog, a scruffy terrier she named Basquiat. The lazy Sunday mornings in bed with newspapers, their legs tangled, the air thick with the smell of coffee and contentment. These memories were shards of glass under his skin, painless until pressed. Aisha's call was a vice grip, but beneath the idyllic images, darker currents swirled. He made his way back to the workshop, the place where he usually felt most in control, and switched on a single dim lamp. His eyes fell again on the ebony chest. The trauma wasn't one thing. It was a slow accumulation, hairline fractures culminating in an unbearable weight, her miscarriages, 3 of them, each a quiet devastation that hollowed them out a bit more. He remembered the first, the way she curled into a ball in their bed, a silent, inconsolable grief he couldn't penetrate. He tried. He brought her tea, held her, whispered they'd try again, but his words felt like pebbles thrown against the fortress of her pain. He was a fixer, a builder. This was something he couldn't mend. With each loss, a small part of her light dimmed, and a chasm, thin as a spider's thread, began to form between them. She threw herself into her art. Her canvases grew darker, more frantic. The screams grew louder. He retreated into his work, the precise, tangible comfort of wood against the amorphous shape of their shared sorrow. They stopped talking about it. The silence grew, becoming a third presence in their marriage, an unwelcome guest at the dinner table, lying between them in bed. Then came the fire. Jamal pressed his head against the cool workshop wall, the memory rising like bile. Not the house, her studio, a rented space in a converted downtown warehouse, a faulty wire. The fire marshal said, an accident, but it took everything. Years of her work, her journals, the physical embodiment of her soul, gone. He remembered the call in the middle of the night, the frantic drive, the sight of orange flames licking the dark sky. He found her standing across the street, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, her face illuminated by the destructive glow. She wasn't crying. She just watched, her expression utterly, terrifyingly blank. That was the end. The fire burned away the last threads holding them together. Her grief, once a quiet ocean, became a tidal wave, but it wasn't aimed at the fire. It was aimed at him. She accused him of not understanding, of being distant, of caring more about his perfect wood than her. He, in his own world of pain and helplessness, lashed out, accusing her of pushing him away, of building walls he couldn't climb. The things they said in those final weeks were cruel, unforgivable, meant to wound, and they struck true. He pushed himself off the wall, his breath coming in ragged bursts. He walked to the ebony chest, his fingers adept at coaxing music from wood, fumbling with the simple lock. No key on his ring, kept hidden in a separate drawer, a deliberate act of separation. He retrieved it, the cold metal a small, solid reality in his chaotic mind. With a click, the lock opened, the lid lifted with a soft sigh of cedar lining. Inside, nestled on black velvet, were the artifacts of his former life, the photos of a smiling, vibrant Aisha, a picture of them on their wedding day, her red boots peeking out. And there, in a small sealed bag, was the blue booty. It was for their first, a boy they'd planned to name Caleb. He found it in her knitting basket after the first miscarriage, its mate already unraveled. He picked it up. The soft crocheted wool felt impossibly small in his large, rough hand. This was the heart of it all, the shared, unspoken, unresolvable pain. This was what they had run from, and now she was calling him back to it. Why, what could she possibly want to talk about? Nothing but ruins and ghosts remained. He sank to the floor, the open chest before him like a tomb. The tiny blue booty clutched in his hand. The carefully built dam inside him finally broke, and for the first time in 15 years, Jamal wept. He wept for the boy they never knew, for the woman he had lost, and for the man he had become in her absence, a hollow echo in a quiet house. 3 days, for 3 agonizing days, Jamal existed in suspended animation. He didn't work. The half-finished guitar lay on his bench, accusing him with its silent, incomplete form. He ate nothing but dry toast that tasted like ash. He merely moved through his house, a ghost in his own life, replaying Aisha's message, dissecting her tone, her breathing, the infinitesimal pause before she said his name. He was caught in a feedback loop of memory and dread. On the 3rd day, he knew he couldn't go on. The uncertainty was a corrosive acid eating at his sanity's foundations. He had to know. With a hand trembling almost imperceptibly, he picked up the phone. He didn't call her back. That felt intimate, too fraught with the potential for an emotional ambush he wasn't ready for. Instead, he sent a text, a modern concession that felt safer, more detached. Asterisk where, and when. Asterisk he hit send before he could lose his nerve. The reply came instantly, as if she'd been waiting, phone in hand. Asterisk Black Cat Cafe, Main Street in Oak Haven. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Is that okay? Asterisk Oak Haven, a town 30 miles away. Neutral ground, a place with no shared memories, no ghosts lurking in the doorways of shops, and a cafe. Public, smart. A clear signal. This was a meeting, not a reunion. He typed back a single word. Asterisk OK. Asterisk. The next 24 hours were a slow-motion torment. He tried to prepare himself, rehearsing conversations in his head, building emotional barricades. He told himself to be calm, detached, to treat it like a business meeting, but his heart, that treacherous organ, refused to cooperate. It fluttered with nervous energy, part fear, part something he refused to name. He chose his clothes with unusual care, settling on a simple taupe sweater and dark jeans. He didn't want to look like he tried too hard, but he also didn't want to look like the hermit he'd become. He shaved, staring at his reflection, a stranger with tired eyes and silver flecks at his temples. When had that happened? He saw the faint lines of past smiles around his eyes, like ancient ruins, remnants of a forgotten civilization. The drive to Oak Haven felt surreal. The familiar Vermont landscape, rolling hills ablaze with autumn, stoic gray farmhouses seemed alien, as if seen through different eyes. He was Jamal driving to meet his ex-wife. The sentence itself felt like it belonged to someone else's story. The Black Cat Cafe was quaint, unassuming, with a steaming mug on its sign and large windows overlooking the sleepy street. He was 5 minutes early. He pushed open the door, a small bell announcing his arrival, and was hit by the warm, rich smell of coffee and pastries. It was cozy, filled with the low murmur of conversation and the clink of ceramic on saucer. He scanned the room and saw her. She was sitting at a small table in the back corner by a window, staring out at the street. Her profile to him, 15 years, fell away, and for a heart-stopping second, she was the same. The cascade of dark hair, now streaked with more silver than his own, the elegant line of her neck, But, as he drew closer, the years reasserted themselves. She looked fragile, thinner than he remembered, with tension around her eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. The vibrant, chaotic energy that had always surrounded her was replaced by a quiet, almost brutal stillness. She must have sensed him, because she turned her head. Her dark eyes, once holding universes for him, widened slightly. Recognition, fear, something else. He couldn't read her anymore. "Jamal," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Aisha, the name, felt foreign on his tongue. He slid into the chair opposite her. The small table felt like a vast, empty continent between them. A silence, thick and heavy with unspoken history, settled over them. A familiar silence from the last years of their marriage, amplified by a decade and a half of absence. A young waitress appeared, bright and cheerful, oblivious to the monumental weight in the air. "Can I get you folks something to drink?" "Black coffee," Jamal said automatically. "Chamomile tea, please," Aisha said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clasped so tightly on the table, her knuckles were pale. The waitress left, and they were alone again. He studied her face, trying to reconcile the woman before him with the girl he'd fallen in love with. The lines on her face were a map of a journey he hadn't witnessed. He wondered about her life. Had she been happy? Found love again? Kept painting. The questions swarmed his mind, but he couldn't ask them. They weren't his to ask. She broke the silence first. "Thank you for coming. I know this is difficult." He gave a slight, non-committal nod. "You said we needed to talk." He hadn't meant it to sound so blunt, so cold, but his emotional armor was locked in place. She flinched almost imperceptibly. "Yes." She took a deep breath, as if bracing herself. "I've seen you, online. Your guitars, they're beautiful. You always were so talented." The compliment caught him off guard. "I keep busy," he mumbled, deflecting. "You look well," she continued, her eyes searching his face. "The quiet life suits you." Was that a jab? He couldn't tell. "It's peaceful." The waitress returned with their drinks, a welcome interruption. He wrapped his hands around the warm mug, a small anchor in the churning sea of his emotions. Aisha cradled her teacup, steam misting her face. "Look, Aisha," he started, taking control. "Why am I here? What's this about? Are you sick? Do you need money?" The questions were brutal, but they were the only ones that justified this. She shook her head, a pained expression crossing her features. No, it's nothing like that. I'm fine financially. I mean," she hesitated, her gaze dropping to her tea. "Jamal, there's no easy way to say this. I've rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in my head, and every version is a disaster." The dread coiling in his gut for 3 days tightened its grip. "Just say it." She looked up, and for the first time, he saw the full, undiluted depth of her desperation. Her eyes were pleading. "It's not about us. Not the way you think. It's about something that happened after. After you left." His mind raced. "Legal trouble. What happened?" She took another shaky breath. Her hand trembled as she reached into the large leather bag on the chair beside her. She pulled out a worn, slightly crumpled manila envelope. It looked old. She pushed it across the table toward him. Her hand drew back, as if it had burned her. "I think you just need to see," she whispered, her voice cracking. I can't find the words." Jamal stared at the envelope. It lay between them, an object of immense, terrifying power. No name, no writing at all, anonymous. Yet he knew with bone-chilling certainty that whatever was inside would destroy the rest of his life. He looked from the envelope to her face. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She gave a tiny, desperate nod. Slowly, as if moving through water, he reached out and took it. His fingers brushed hers for a fleeting second, and a jolt like static electricity shot up his arm, the first touch in 15 years. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in his hands. He hesitated for a long moment, the cafe sounds fading into a distant hum. Then, with a sense of impending doom, he unfastened the metal clasp and tilted the contents onto the table. Not a document, not a letter, a faded photograph. The photograph slid out and came to rest beside his coffee mug, a standard 4x6 print, its corners softened with age, its colors slightly washed out, as if the memory it held struggled to stay vibrant. For a moment, Jamal's mind refused to process what he saw. A simple domestic scene, a young boy, no older than 7 or 8, sat on a sunlit patch of grass, a golden retriever puppy tumbling in his lap. The boy was laughing, his head thrown back, eyes squeezed shut in pure, unadulterated joy. Jamal's breath hitched in his chest. A cold, creeping numbness started in his fingertips and spread through his body. He picked up the photograph, his hand shaking so violently he was surprised he could hold it steady. The boy had dark, unruly hair falling over his forehead, a small, resolute chin. But his eyes, even squeezed shut in laughter, Jamal could see their shape, could imagine their color, and his smile. It wasn't Aisha's radiant, lopsided grin. It was his own, a mirror image of the smile he saw in old photos of himself, a smile he hadn't seen on his own face in 15 years. "Who is this?" he asked, but the words were a choked whisper. He already knew. The answer was in the architecture of the boy's face, in the ghost of his own features. The question wasn't who, but how. Aisha was crying now, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. "His name is Leo," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He's 14. He'll be 15 in 2 months. 14. The number struck Jamal like a physical blow. He did the math, his mind a clumsy abacus. 14 years and 10 months. He looked up from the photograph, his gaze locking with hers. The question was a silent scream in the space between them. "He's yours, Jamal," she confirmed, her voice breaking. "He's our son." The world tilted on its axis. The cheerful chatter of the cafe, the clinking of spoons on cups, the scent of coffee, it all warped and distorted as if he'd been plunged underwater. A roaring in his ears. Asterisk our son. Asterisk the 2 words were an impossibility, a tear in reality's fabric. "No," he said, shaking his head. "No, that's not possible. After the last time, the doctors said." "The doctors were wrong," she said softly. "Or maybe it was a miracle. I don't know. I found out about a month after you left, after everything was finalized. Asterisk after you left." Asterisk the words were a quiet accusation, a reminder of their separation's finality. He had walked away, moved to Vermont, built a new life on the assumption their story was over, that all possibilities were exhausted and buried. "Why?" The word tore from him, raw and ragged. "Aisha, why didn't you tell me for 14 years? Why?" This was the question that mattered, the one with the power to condemn, or perhaps explain. A storm of emotions passed over Aisha's face. Shame, fear, defiance, and a profound, bone-deep weariness. "You have to understand," she began, leaning forward, palms flat on the table as if to keep herself from flying apart. "I was a wreck. We were a wreck. What we had, it was broken, Jamal. We had destroyed each other. The anger, the grief, it was toxic." He remembered the raw, screaming fights, the days of suffocating silence, the blame. God, the blame. "When I found out I was pregnant," she continued, her voice dropping lower, "my first thought was terror. I couldn't lose another one. I couldn't. And then I thought of you. I pictured telling you, and all I could see was that look in your eyes, the hope, the desperate hope I knew I'd see, followed by the terror, the same terror I was feeling. I couldn't put you through it again. I couldn't put asterisk as asterisk through it again. What if something had gone wrong? Another loss would have obliterated what little was left of me, and I think it would have destroyed you, too." He wanted to argue, to shout that it was his right to know, his right to share that terror and hope. But a painfully honest part of him knew she was right. He had been a hollowed-out man. Another loss, another round and sterile, quiet hospital rooms, it would have been the end of him. So I ran, she said. I took my share of the money and went to Oregon. I told everyone I needed to start over, away from the memories, away from the fire. No one knew. My own family didn't know for almost a year. I needed to do it alone, on my own terms. I needed to protect him, and I needed to protect myself from the pressure, from the memories, from you. The last words were barely audible, but they landed like punches. Asterisk from you. Asterisk he had become. A source of pain, a threat. The realization was a fresh wound atop old scars. I told myself it was the right thing to do, she said, wiping tears with the back of her hand. I told myself you had chosen peace, that you had moved onto a life of quiet solitude because that's what you needed. Dragging you back into the chaos felt cruel. So I raised him. I got a job teaching art at a community college. We had a small, quiet life, and he asterisk is asterisk everything. Jamal, he's happy. He's healthy. He looked down at the photograph again. Leo, the boy, his son, was laughing. He looked happy. He looked whole. He had a life, a full life that Jamal had no part in. A universe had been created without his knowledge. He felt like a man waking from a coma to find the world utterly changed. Does he know about me? Jamal asked, his voice strained. Aisha hesitated, the silence stretching for a heart-stopping moment. He knows his father was an artist, a man I loved very much. He knows we lost each other to grief. I never lied to him about that, but he doesn't know your name. He doesn't know where you are. I told him you died. The confession hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. He was dead. In the story of his own son's life, he was a ghost. A tragic prologue. The numbness enveloping him receded, replaced by a surge of white-hot anger. You told him I was dead, he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. People at a nearby table glanced over. You had no right. You had no right to do any of this. To keep him from me, to erase me from his life. What in God's name were you thinking? I was thinking of protecting him, she shot back, her own voice rising with the defensive fire he remembered well. From a life of questions he couldn't have answered. From a father who wasn't there. What was I supposed to tell him? That his father was alive but didn't want to know him. That was the choice you made when you walked away from us, from everything. I walked away from the pain, he retorted. I didn't walk away from a son I never knew I had. That's different, Aisha, and you know it. They stared at each other across the table, old battle lines redrawn in an instant. The years of separation vanished, and they were back in their ruined marriage, to people fluent in the language of each other's pain. He slumped back in his chair, the anger draining as quickly as it came, leaving him empty and trembling. He looked at the laughing boy in the picture, his son. If you went to all that trouble to erase me, he asked, his voice hollow, then, why are you here now? Why tell me after all this time? What's changed? Aisha's defensive anger crumbled, replaced by a look of pure, gut-wrenching fear. She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture he recognized. It was what she did when the world was closing in. Because, she whispered, and her next words shattered the last vestiges of his composure. Because he's sick, Jamal. Leo is very, very sick, and you're the only one who can help him. The words hung in the air, a devastating counterpoint to the cafe's cheerful ambience. Asterisk he's sick. Jamal. Asterisk the world, already tilted, spun completely out of control. Jamal felt a wave of nausea, and the face of the laughing boy in the photograph swam before his eyes. He heard Aisha speaking, but her voice seemed to come from a great distance, distorted and faint. Asterisk aplastic anemia asterisk, she was saying. Asterisk a rare blood disorder. His bone marrow. It's failing. It stopped producing enough new blood cells. Asterisk he forced himself to focus, to claw his way back to the surface. What does that mean? What's the treatment? Transfusions for now. Platelets. Red blood cells. They keep him stable, But it's not a cure, it's a patch. The doctors have tried immunosuppressive therapy, but it's not working as well as they'd hoped. Her voice was unnervingly clinical, the detached tone of a parent forced to learn a new, terrifying language of medical terms. The only real cure, the only chance he has for a normal life, is a bone marrow transplant. And there it was, the reason, the terrible, inevitable reason he was here, sitting in this cafe, his world in ruins around him. They've tested me, of course, Aisha continued, her gaze fixed on the table, unable to meet his eyes. I'm not a match, not close enough. They've searched the national registry, the international registries, for months. There are no donors, Jamal, not a single one. She finally looked up, and the raw agony in her eyes was a physical blow. Siblings are the best chance, but he doesn't have any siblings. He has me, Jamal said, the words coming out before he'd fully formed the thought, a biological certainty, a genetic lottery, his son's life now depended on. He has you, she confirmed, her voice a fragile whisper. There's a high probability you could be a match, a much higher probability than any stranger. You're his best hope, his only hope. He stared at her, the enormity of it all, crashing down. For 15 years, she had built a life on the foundation of a secret, a life in which he was a ghost. And now that life's foundations were crumbling, and she had come to resurrect him. Not for her, not for them, but for a boy he'd never met. A boy whose life was now inexplicably tied to his own. When did you find out? He asked, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was the only way he could keep from shattering. The diagnosis was 6 months ago. At first, they thought it was just a persistent virus. He was always tired, bruising easily. I thought he was just a teenager. You know, staying up too late, not eating right. She let out a dry, humorless laugh that turned into a sob. I was so naive. For the past 4 months, we've been searching for a donor. Every day, waiting for a call that never comes. Every day, watching him get a little weaker. 6 months. She had known for 6 months and only came to him now, at the 11th hour. The anger, briefly subsided, began to smolder again. So, I was the last resort, he said, the bitterness sharp on his tongue. You exhausted every other option on earth before you even considered telling me had a son. That's not fair, she retorted, tears in her eyes flashing with indignation. Do you have any idea what this is like for me? To have to come to you like this? To lay my entire life, my son's life, at your feet and beg. I was trying to protect him, Jamal, first from our past, and then from this. I didn't want to bring you into this unless I absolutely had to. I didn't want his introduction to his father to be as a medical procedure. So, what did you want? He shot back. For him to die thinking his father was already dead. The cruelty of his own words hung in the air, shocking them both into silence. He hadn't meant to say it, but the tangled knot of betrayal, grief, and rage lashed out blindly. He saw the wound land on her face. She physically recoiled, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Yes, she whispered, her voice utterly broken. Maybe, God forgive me, but maybe that would have been easier than this. The fight went out of him. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the woman who had betrayed him, but a terrified mother watching her child slip away. The weight of her secret, carried alone for all those years, was crushing her. She had made an impossible choice 15 years ago, and now she faced an even more impossible reality. Tell me about him, Jamal said, his tone softening. The anger was a useless emotion now, a luxury he couldn't afford. He needed to know if he was going to be asked to save this boy. He needed to know who he was. A fragile light flickered in Aisha's eyes at the change in his tone. Leo, she said, the name a prayer on her lips. Oh, he's an amazing kid. He's smart, smarter than me. He loves science, astronomy. He can name all the constellations. I bought him a telescope for his 12th birthday, and he'll stay up all night in the backyard just looking. She reached for the photograph, her fingers tracing the outline of the boy's laughing face. He's quiet like you, thoughtful. He's not a big sports kid. He'd rather be reading a book or building something with his hands. He makes these incredible, intricate models, spaceships mostly, from Star Wars from Star Trek some from his own imagination. Jamal's heart ached. Building things with his hands. A quiet boy who loved to create a piece of him, a part of his soul, had been living and breathing in the world all this time. He has your kindness, Aisha continued, her voice gaining a little strength as she spoke of her son. He's the kid who will always stand up for the one being picked on. He has this fierce sense of justice, and he has a dry sense of humor. He makes me laugh even now, especially now. He's so brave, Jamal, braver than I am. He never complains, he just gets tired. She broke down completely, her face crumpling as she tried and failed to hold back a wave of grief. He's so tired, she sobbed, her shoulders shaking, and I can't fix it. I'm his mother, and I can't do anything but watch. Jamal felt his own carefully constructed walls crumble to dust. This wasn't about him and Aisha anymore. It wasn't about the past or the lies or the betrayal. All of that was just noise. The only thing that mattered was the signal, the clear, desperate truth. A 14-year-old boy, his son, was fighting for his life. He reached across the table and, for the first time since she'd walked out of their broken home, he took her hand. Her fingers were icy cold. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise and a desperate, flickering hope. Okay, he said, his voice firm, resolute. He was a luthier, a builder, a fixer. This was something he could do. Okay, Aisha, what do I have to do? Where do we start? Relief washed over her face, so potent it was almost painful to watch. It was the look of a drowning person who had just found something to hold on to. The hospital is in Portland. They know. They know I was going to try to find you. They're ready to do the testing as soon as you're ready. It's just a blood test to start, to see if you're a match. I'll leave in the morning, he said, no hesitation in his voice. The decision was made. There was no other choice. Jamal, she started, her voice thick with gratitude, and 100 other unsaid things. I don't have the right to ask this of you, but thank you. Don't thank me, he said, pulling his hand away. He needed the distance back. He needed his armor. I'm not doing this for you or for me. I'm doing this for him. He stood, placing a $20 bill on the table to cover their drinks. He needed to leave. He needed air. He needed to be alone to process the cataclysmic shift that had just occurred. His life was no longer his own. It was now inextricably linked to a sick boy in Oregon who built model spaceships and looked at the stars. A boy who had his smile. He turned and walked out of the cafe, not looking back. The bell above the door chimed his exit. The cold autumn air hit him, a welcome shock. He leaned against the brick wall of the building, taking deep, ragged breaths. He looked up at the pale afternoon sky, but he didn't see the sun or the clouds. He saw a 14-year-old boy, his son, looking back at him from a faded photograph, waiting for a father he didn't know existed to save his life. The drive back to his quiet Vermont house was a blur. The fiery autumn landscape passed unseen, the winding roads navigated by muscle memory alone. Jamal's mind was a maelstrom, a chaotic whirlwind of shock, fury, and a terrifying new tenderness. One word pulsed at the center of it all. Son. He had a son. A son who was sick, a son who needed him. He stormed into his house, the slam of the door echoing the turmoil in his soul. The tranquility of the space was a mockery now. His meticulously ordered life, his sanctuary of silence, had been irrevocably breached. He paced the living room like a caged animal, fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to roar, to smash something, to break the beautiful, fragile things he'd spent years creating. Just as his own life had been broken, the lie he kept circling, Back to the lie. Asterisk, I told him you died. Asterisk, the words were a brand on his heart. Aisha hadn't just kept his son from him, she had erased him, murdered him in effigy. She had curated a world for Leo where he didn't exist. How could she do that? How could she look at that child, a child with his smile, his quiet nature, and deny him his father? He collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. The anger was a roaring fire, but beneath it, something else stirred, a profound, bottomless grief. He wasn't just grieving for the lost years, for the first steps he never saw, the first words he never heard. He was grieving for the man he might have been, a father, a dad. The word felt alien, a role he'd never auditioned for, but one written in his very DNA. Would he have been a good father? The question haunted him. The pain of the miscarriages had left him feeling broken, inadequate. He had retreated from Aisha's grief, unable to fix it, and in doing so had convinced himself he was a failure. Perhaps Aisha had been right. Perhaps he would have been a terrible father then, suffocated by fear, a ghost at his own family's table. Maybe her decision, however cruel, had been a strange, twisted kind of mercy, saving Leo from a father who was only half a man. The thought offered no comfort. He couldn't stay in the house. The silence was too loud. He went into his workshop, the scent of wood and varnish usually so calming offering no solace. He looked at the guitar on his bench, its graceful curves and perfect lines. He built things that made music, that brought beauty into the world. Yet his own life was a discordant, broken chord. His phone buzzed. A text from Aisha. Asterisk, I've booked you a flight. Portland. It leaves from Albany tomorrow at 7 a.m. I'll text you the details. I can't thank you enough, Jamal. Asterisk, the practicalities were a sudden cold splash of water. This was real. This was happening. He was flying across the country tomorrow to a hospital to give his blood, perhaps a piece of himself, his very marrow, to save the life of a stranger who was his own flesh and blood. The anger and grief receded, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged fear. What if he wasn't a match? The thought was a punch to the gut. After all this, the revelation, the emotional devastation. What if it was all for nothing? What if he was just another dead end, another failed hope? He couldn't bear the thought of facing that boy, of facing Aisha and telling them he couldn't help. The last resort, the failed savior. The pressure was immense, a physical weight on his chest. And what if he was a match? What then? The transplant procedure itself was daunting, painful, he was sure. But that was the easy part. What came after? Did he just donate his marrow and disappear again, become the ghost Aisha had made him? Could he do that? Could he meet his son, save his life, and then simply walk away? The idea felt monstrous. But what was the alternative? To suddenly declare himself Leo's father, to shatter the boy's entire reality at the most vulnerable moment of his life. Hi, I'm your dad. I wasn't dead. I was just living in Vermont making guitars. Sorry about the lie. The absurdity, the sheer cruelty of it, was unthinkable. He spent the night packing a small bag, his movements mechanical. He was a man on autopilot, his mind and heart disconnected. He packed jeans, sweaters, a book he knew he wouldn't read. He looked around his house, this quiet world he had so carefully curated. It already felt like it belonged to someone else. He was leaving the luthier behind. He didn't know who he would be when, or if, he came back. Before he left for the airport in the pre-dawn darkness, he walked back into the workshop one last time. He opened the ebony chest. He looked at the photographs of him and Aisha, so young, so full of a future that never happened. Then he reached in and took the single blue booty. He slipped it into his jacket pocket. He didn't know why, maybe to remind himself of the beginning of the grief, or maybe to remind himself that once, long ago, all he had ever wanted was to be a father. The flight to Portland was 8 hours of purgatory, trapped in a metal tube, suspended between his old life and an unknowable future. Jamal felt utterly alone. He closed his eyes, but all he could see was the boy's laughing face. Leo, he said the name to himself, testing its weight. It felt both strange and deeply familiar. When he landed in Portland, the air was different, damp, smelling of rain and pine. It felt like another world. Aisha had texted him the hospital's address and said she'd meet him there. He took a cab, watching the unfamiliar city slide past his window. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. The hospital was a sprawling complex of glass and steel, a place of forced hope and quiet desperation. He walked through the automatic doors and was hit by the sterile antiseptic smell he associated with the worst moments of his life. His old trauma rose up, a reflexive wave of panic. He forced himself to walk to the information desk, his legs like lead. He found the wing Sisha had directed him to, pediatric oncology and hematology. The name itself was terrifying. The walls were painted with cheerful murals of cartoon animals and smiling suns, a desperate attempt to mask the grim reality of the place. He saw children, some with bald heads, some pulling for poles, and his heart cracked open. He saw Aisha standing at the end of a long hallway, waiting for him. She looked smaller here, swallowed by the scale of the institution, her face etched with palpable fear even from a distance. As he approached, she straightened, trying to compose herself. "Jamal, you came. I said I would," he replied, his voice clipped. He looked past her, down the hallway at the closed doors, behind one of which. "His room is just down there," she said, following his gaze. "He's sleeping right now. He had a transfusion this morning. It always makes him exhausted." "Is he? How is he?" "He's stable," she said. "He's a fighter?" A doctor, a woman with kind, tired eyes, came out and introduced herself as Dr. Aris. She shook Jamal's hand firmly. "Mr. Sheridan, thank you for coming. Aisha has explained the situation. We're ready to draw your blood for the preliminary HLA typing whenever you are." It was all happening so fast. He nodded, unable to speak. Dr. Aris led him into a small, sterile room. A phlebotomist was waiting. He sat down, rolled up his sleeve. He looked away as the needle went in, focusing on a crack in the ceiling tile. He felt the vial fill with his warm blood, his life force, his genetic code, the code that might save his son. After it was done, Dr. Aris spoke to him. "It will take a few days to get the results back," she explained. "We'll know then if you're a viable match. In the meantime, Aisha has booked you a room at a hotel nearby." He nodded again. Feeling like a puppet, he walked out of the room and found Aisha waiting, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. Do you want to see him?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Just for a second. He's asleep." He wouldn't know. Jamal's heart stopped. See him in the flesh. The reality of it was terrifying. He was torn. Part of him desperately wanted to lay eyes on his son, but another part, drowning in fear and confusion, screamed at him to run. But he couldn't run, not anymore. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. She led him down the hallway to a room at the very end. The door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open silently, and they slipped inside. The room was dim, the only light coming from the glowing monitors beside the bed. The air was filled with the soft, rhythmic beeping of the machines. And there, in the hospital bed, surrounded by tubes and wires, was Leo. He was pale, his skin almost translucent, his dark hair matted against the pillow. And the fourth line snaked into his arm. He looked so small, so fragile in the large bed. But even in sleep, even in sickness, Jamal could see it. The shape of his jaw, the curve of his brow, the ghost of his own face reflected back through time. He was beautiful. Jamal felt something inside him shift, a tectonic plate sliding into place. The anger, the betrayal, the confusion, it all fell away. In that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the boy in the bed, his son. He took a step closer, an invisible force pulling him toward the bed. He had an overwhelming, primal urge to reach out, to touch his son's hand, to smooth the hair from his forehead. But he didn't. He wasn't his father. He was a ghost, a secret, a potential cure. He stood there for a long time, just watching. His son breathed, the soft rise and fall of his chest, a fragile rhythm in the quiet room, and in the shattered landscape of his heart, a single, fierce, undeniable truth took root. He would do anything, absolutely anything, to save this boy. The next 3 days were the longest of Jamal's life. He existed in a strange limbo, a ghost, haunting the hospital's sterile corridors and the anonymous quiet of his hotel room. He and Aisha established a tense, unspoken truce. They were allies in a war, their shared history a minefield they carefully navigated. They spoke only of Leo. Aisha would give him updates via text. Asterisk he had a good morning, kept his breakfast down. Asterisk or asterisk difficult night, low-grade fever. Asterisk Jamal would sit in the hospital cafeteria, nursing a single cup of coffee for hours, waiting. He never went back to Leo's room, he couldn't. Seeing him once had been profound. Seeing him again felt like a transgression. He was the secret, the ace in the hole. He had to remain a ghost until they knew if he could even play his part. During those days of waiting, he learned more about the son he'd never known. Aisha, in her moments of exhaustion and fear, would talk. She told him about Leo's first word asterisk book asterisk his crippling fear of spiders, his quiet determination to master a difficult piece on the piano. She showed Jamal a drawing Leo had made, a detailed, imaginative rendering of a spaceship soaring through Saturn's rings. On the back, in a child's careful script, was the ship's name, asterisk the Wanderer asterisk. Jamal held the drawing in his hands, his calloused fingertips tracing the lines. This was his son, a dreamer, an artist, a wanderer. He saw himself in the boy's creation, a shared language of making, of bringing something new into the world. The connection, he felt, was no longer just biological, it was deeper, a resonance, of spirit that transcended the lost years. The grief for what he'd missed was a physical ache in his chest. On the third afternoon, Aisha found him in the small, sterile family lounge. He knew from the look on her face before she spoke. It wasn't hope or despair, it was something more complicated. Terror and relief mingled together. They have the results, she said, her voice tight. He stood, his legs unsteady. And you're a perfect match, Jamal. Her voice broke on the last word. A 10 out of 10. Drive. Reese said it's the best possible outcome, the absolute best. Jamal felt the air leave his lungs in a rush. Relief, so potent it made him dizzy, flooded his system. He could help. It wasn't all for nothing. He leaned against the wall for support, closing his eyes. Okay, he breathed. Good, that's good. They want to schedule the harvest for next week. Aisha continued, the words tumbling out now. They need to give Leo a round of chemotherapy first to prepare his body, to wipe out his own failing marrow, though it can accept yours. It's going to be rough for him. The clinical reality sobered him instantly. This wasn't a magical cure, it was a brutal, painful process for Leo. What do we tell him? Jamal asked, the question that had lurked in the shadows for days now stepping into the light. How do we explain me? This was it, the moment of reckoning. Aisha wrung her hands, her face a mask of anxiety. I've talked to Dr. Aris and to a hospital psychologist. They both agree. We have to tell him the truth. The truth. Jamal's heart hammered. That his mother has been lying to him his entire life and his dead father is suddenly alive now while he's about to go through chemo. How is that a good idea? Because the alternative is worse, she insisted, her voice pleading. What? Do we say that we found a magical stranger on a donor list who happens to be a perfect match? He's not a little kid, Jamal. He's 14, he's smart. He'd ask questions we can't answer, and the lie would just get bigger. It would be a foundation of poison. The psychologist said secrets like this, they fester. The truth, no matter how hard, is better. It has to come out. He knew she was right. But the thought of it, of being the agent of that painful truth, was terrifying. And how do you propose we do that? You just walk in and say, Leo, honey, meet Jamal, he's your father, and he's here to save your life. No, she said softly, we walk in together. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through him. He was a stranger, a ghost. What right did he have to be in that room for that conversation? He's going to hate me. Aisha, he's going to look at me and hate me for not being there. The fear was a cold knot in his stomach. He might, she admitted, her honesty brutal. Or he might hate me for lying to him. Or he might be so scared and sick that he won't know what to feel. We can't control his reaction. Jamal, all we can do is tell him the truth with as much love as we can and be there for whatever comes next. Her words, full of a strength he hadn't seen in her for years, settled him. She was right. This wasn't about him or his fear of rejection. It was about Leo. They scheduled it for the next day. The long road had finally led to this, a small room at the end of a long hallway. Jamal didn't sleep. He paced his hotel room, rehearsing introductions that all sounded hollow and false. He looked at his reflection in the mirror and saw a frightened man about to change a boy's life forever. For better or worse, he clutched the small blue booty in his pocket, its soft wool a tangible link to a past full of love and a future terrifyingly uncertain. The next morning, he met Aisha outside Leo's room. She looked as if she hadn't slept either. They didn't speak. They just looked at each other, a shared understanding passing between them. They were about to detonate a bomb in the life of the person they both loved most in the world. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Leo was awake. He was sitting up in bed, propped against a pile of pillows, a laptop on the overbed table. He was watching a documentary about nebulae, vibrant cosmic clouds filling the screen. He was thin, paler than when Jamal had seen him sleeping, with dark circles under his eyes. But his eyes, when he looked up as they entered, caught Jamal's breath. They were his own eyes, a deep, thoughtful brown filled with an intelligence that seemed older than his years. Hey, Mom, he said, his voice a little weak. Then his eyes shifted to Jamal, and a flicker of curiosity, of confusion, crossed his face. Who's this? Aisha walked over to the bed and smoothed his hair back from his forehead. Her movements were gentle, but Jamal could see the tremor in her hand. Leo, honey, this is someone I need you to meet. This is a very old friend of mine. His name is Jamal. Jamal stood awkwardly by the door, feeling like an intruder. He gave a small, hesitant wave. Hi, Leo. Leo looked between them, his brow furrowed. He was sharp. He could sense the tension in the room, the monumental weight behind their stilted words. Okay, he said slowly, drawing the word out. Aisha sat on the edge of the bed, taking Leo's hand. Sweetheart, we need to talk to you about the donor. They found one, a perfect match. A small, weary smile touched Leo's lips. Really, that's great. But his eyes were still on Jamal, questioning. It is great, Aisha said, her voice trembling slightly. It's a miracle. But Leo, the donor, it's not a stranger. Jamal watched the boy's face, saw the flicker of understanding, the dawning comprehension. He was putting the pieces together with astonishing speed. His gaze locked onto Jamal's, and the question was there, clear as day. Aisha took a ragged breath. Leo, when I told you about your father, I wasn't honest with you. I was scared, and I made a decision a long time ago that I thought was right. But maybe it wasn't. Your father. He didn't die, sweetheart. The room was utterly silent, save for the soft beeping of the monitor. Leo's eyes never left Jamal's face. He showed no surprise, no shock, just a quiet, intense, unnerving stillness. It's you, Leo said, his voice flat. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Jamal's heart felt like it would beat out of his chest. He could only nod, the movement stiff, unnatural. The boy, his son, held his gaze for a long moment. Jamal braced himself for the explosion for anger, tears, accusations. He was ready for the hatred he felt he deserved, but it didn't come. Leo just kept looking at him, his expression unreadable. Then he turned his gaze to his laptop, where a brilliant image of the horsehead nebula was displayed. "So," Leo said, his voice quiet but clear, "my dad makes guitars." The words so simple, so unexpected, so full of knowledge he shouldn't have possessed struck Jamal with the force of a physical blow. He looked at Aisha, whose face was a mask of utter bewilderment. Leo looked back at Jamal, and for the first time, a small, sad, impossibly weary smile touched his lips. "I looked you up," he said softly, "a long time ago." The confession, so quiet and unexpected, left both Jamal and Aisha momentarily speechless. The bomb had been detonated, but the explosion wasn't what they'd anticipated. It was a silent, internal implosion. You knew," Aisha stammered, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. Leo's gaze shifted to his mother, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something other than weary resignation in his eyes, a deep, quiet hurt. "I found some of your old things," he explained, his voice still soft, "in a box in the attic. Paintings, journals from before you moved to Oregon. You wrote about him." Jamal Sheridan, the luthier, he had been carrying this secret, too, a boy alone with the truth he couldn't share. Jamal's heart fractured. While he had been living his quiet life, ignorant, his son had been living with a ghost who had a name. "I was 12, Leo continued, his eyes now fixed on the swirling colors of the nebula on his screen. "I googled the name. I found his website. I've seen all the guitars. The Rosewood Requiem is my favorite." He looked back at Jamal. "The inlay work on the rosette is incredible." Jamal couldn't speak. This brilliant, sick child knew his work. He had been seen, been known in a way he never could have imagined. He had been a father in secret to a son in secret. "Why didn't you say anything?" Aisha asked, her voice choked with tears. "Leo, why didn't you ask me?" Leo shrugged, a small, tired movement. "You told me he was gone. I figured. You had your reasons for the story. I didn't want to make you sad." He paused, and his next words were heavy with the weight of a child forced to grow up too soon. "And I guess I figured if he wanted to know me, he would have found me." The words were a blade twisting in Jamal's gut. It was the condemnation he'd been expecting, but delivered with a quiet, devastating matter-of-factness far worse than any shouting rage. "Leo," Jamal said, his voice raspy. He took a step forward, then another, until he stood by the bed. "That's not. I didn't know you existed. I swear to you, if I had known, nothing in the world would have kept me away." The boy looked at him, his brown eyes searching Jamal's face for the truth. Jamal met his gaze without flinching, pouring all his honesty, all his regret, all his burgeoning love into that single look. Leo seemed to accept it. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't tense or awkward. It was a space for breathing, for absorbing the new shape of their reality. "So," Leo said finally, breaking the quiet, "you're a match. Not a question?" "Yes," Jamal said. "A perfect one. And you're going to do it. The transplant." "Yes," Jamal said, his voice full of a certainty that was the only solid ground he had. "Of course." Leo held his gaze for another long moment, then he nodded again. "Okay," he said, and with that simple, quiet word, the matter was settled. There was no grand emotional scene, no dramatic reconciliation. Just a sick child accepting the strange, miraculous, painful truth of his life, and the two broken adults who had created him standing by his bed, vowing to fix what they could. The week that followed was a blur of medical preparations and quiet moments. The chemotherapy was brutal. It ravaged Leo's body, leaving him weak, nauseous, and stripped of everything but his quiet courage. Jamal was a constant presence. He and Aisha took shifts, one of them always in the room. He didn't try to force a relationship, didn't push for the title of dad. He just stayed. He read to Leo from books about astrophysics when the boy was too tired to hold them himself. They watched all the Star Wars movies in order. They talked not about the past, but about stars and woodworking and music. Jamal discovered the quick, dry wit his son had inherited from him. He saw the fierce intelligence, the deep will of kindness Aisha had described. He was falling in love with his son, a painful, beautiful, heart-wrenching experience. The day of the harvest, Jamal was terrified. But as they wheeled him into the operating room, he felt a strange sense of calm. He was a luthier. His purpose was to take raw material and shape it into something that could create harmony. This felt no different. He was giving a piece of himself, his very marrow, to create a new harmony in his son's body. When he woke, groggy and sore, Aisha was there. "It's done," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "They're infusing him with your cells right now. It went perfectly. The recovery was a long, slow road. The 2 weeks after the transplant were the most critical, a tense waiting game to see if the new cells would graft, if Leo's body would accept this part of his father. Jamal stayed. He never discussed leaving. The thought never even occurred to him. His place was here. One afternoon, about a month after the transplant, Jamal was sitting by Leo's bed while Aisha had gone to get coffee. Leo was looking better. There was a faint touch of color in his cheeks, and his eyes were brighter. He was sketching in a notepad, designing a new spaceship. "You know," Leo said without looking up from his drawing, "you don't have to stay forever. Once I'm better, you have a life back in Vermont." Jamal looked at his son, this miraculous boy who had rewritten his entire existence. He thought of his quiet house, his solitary workshop, the life of peaceful emptiness he had so carefully constructed. It felt like a dream from another lifetime. It held no appeal anymore. "My life is here now," Jamal said softly. If you'll have me." Leo stopped drawing. He looked up, his expression serious. "What would you even do here?" "I don't know," Jamal admitted. "Maybe open a workshop. Portland could probably use another luthier. But mostly, I was thinking I'd just be a dad. I'm a little late, I know, but I'd like to try if you'll let me." A slow smile spread across Leo's face. It was the first genuine, happy smile Jamal had ever seen from him in person, and with a jolt that went straight to his soul, he saw it clearly. It wasn't his smile. It wasn't Aisha's. It was Leo's. It was his own. "Okay, Dad," Leo said, the word simple, natural. "I think I'd like that." It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was the beginning of something new, something complicated and real. There were years of lies to unpack, a broken trust between Aisha and Leo to mend. There was a new, tentative relationship between Jamal and Aisha to navigate, no longer husband and wife, but partners in the sacred, terrifying job of loving their son. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in 15 years, Jamal wasn't alone on it. He had a son, he had a family, he had a future. He looked at Leo, who had gone back to his drawing, and he felt a sense of peace he had never known, a harmony built not from solitude, but from a profound, life-altering connection. So now I turn to you. Imagine you are Jamal. You've built a life of peace on the ruins of a painful past. Then one day, the woman who broke your heart reappears with an impossible secret, a child, your child, whose life hangs in the balance. She lied to you, erased you, and only came to you as a last resort. What would you have done? Would you have been able to forgive the lie to save the boy? Could you open your heart again after so many years of silence?